Hello, everybody. Welcome, welcome, welcome to our very last Accessibility Adventure seminar. We have been doing this for half of a year now. You are participating in our Action and Expression Plus session. I'll show you in just a second where you can access our previous recording. So if this is your first time joining us, welcome. But there's lots of learning that you can engage with as well. We have recorded sessions of our previous time together. So we'll show you that in just a second. We're really excited to be here with all of you. My name is John Pauls. I'm a learning experience designer and professor in Jacksonville, Florida, and I am joined by the fabulous Kristen Harrington, who's a virtual learning coordinator and author here in Florida as well. We have been joining you the last half of the year talking about the importance of accessibility and hopefully providing you with some tips and tricks that make the concept of accessible learning a little bit less daunting for everybody. And so, again, we encourage you to check back on our previous recordings that we have to fill in any gaps that you may experience. We are with the Northwest Council for Computer Education, NCCE. We are one of the oldest and largest professional learning organizations in the United States. We are educators serving educators. And so if you or your organization or your school system is trying to tackle any difficult topics like artificial intelligence in education or accessibility in education or blended learning or anything else that involves technology or pedagogy, please reach out to NCCE, ncce.org. We have a team of national professional learning specialists that would be willing and love to work with you in your organization. So whatever your learning needs are, NCCE can accommodate. So visit ncce.org and we'll get you taken care of. Now, before we start, we're going to frame our conversation. We do this every time we're together. We try to situate our learning that we're about to engage in so that we can really apply it to our own lives. So let's take just a moment to frame why we're talking about accessibility and why it's important. Accessibility is important, but it does take intentional effort. It does not just happen automatically, but providing access is always going to be worth the investment. So you spending time watching this or participating with us, that's showing effort, and that's saying, hey, there's something that I need to learn, and we are happy to be able to assist you with that. As educators, we have to refrain from protecting and preserving traditional keys to learning. So you see on your screen a bunch of different keys and you got a lock. Those keys are not going to probably fit that lock. We've got a car key and a little older key that might be to an old house. This is to illustrate the concept that while we may have taught and presented content one way our entire lives, that may not always be working for all of our students and our learners in 2025. So we want to not protect that traditional form, but we need to become the swipe card. We need to turn in our keys and become swipe cards so that we can change and adjust our access and our presentation based on the environment. If we become those swipe cards, we're going to adapt. We're going to modify what we're doing based on the students that are in our classroom and based on the topics that we are exploring together. So I want you to think about yourself. If you've been teaching for a while and you've been doing the same thing over and over again, it's probably fabulous, but I encourage you to explore how we can revisit how we prepare and deliver instruction to make sure that we're accommodating all of our learners. Together, we're going to explore how we can provide access to all in our own work and our practices. So these sessions have been designed to give you concrete and easy ways that you can make your learning environments and experiences more accessible for your learners. This is, like I said, our very last session with you all this year. It has been so fun hanging out and talking about the importance of accessibility with everybody. If you visit t.ly/underscore capital V lowercase y 52 or scan the QR code that is on your screen in front of you, that will take us to our database where we have all of our recorded sessions that we had previously engaged in. So we do encourage you to take back a look at those previous recorded webinars and get any information that you can out of those. There's lots of valuable learning. And so we encourage you to visit. If this was your first visit with us, welcome, but don't make it your last. So go back over there and check out our recordings and always reach out if you have any questions about what we talked about. Now, today we are going to talk specifically about action and expression. If you go back to our recordings, we actually already had a session on action and expression, but it was introducing the concept. And today we're going to talk a little bit deeper about that. And I'm going to give you some little tips and tricks about how you can navigate action and expression in your practices. And so we're going to dive in and see what this actually means. So in our context, when we talk about universal design for learning, which we'll get to in just a little bit, when we talk about action and expression, we are referring to action being how learners navigate their environment. So, are they in a classroom? Are they walking around the classroom? Are they in a learning management system? How do they navigate the learning environment around them? And when we talk about expression, we're talking about how students show what they know. How do they express that they have learned? They express engagement or interaction with the learning? Action and expression is the how of learning. And so, with this framing of action and expression, we're going to talk about what this looks like when we're creating accessible and inclusive spaces. I was talking just a moment ago about universal design for learning. This is actually the framework that we've been discussing and investigating for the last 6 months. Universal design for learning, you will find in the literature, lots of people implement UDL principles. And so this webinar is really going to show you a little bit, especially in the action and expression domain of UDL. And we're going to give you all the resources so you can go back and investigate UDL if it is new for you. It's a fantastic system to make sure that we are providing accessible learning for everybody. The UDL guidelines are a tool that are used in the implementation for universal design for learning. That framework was developed by CAST to improve and optimize teaching and learning for all people based on scientific insights into how humans learn. So when we talk about UDL, this is not some kind of fad. This is something that is grounded in science, that a lot of time and effort was spent in developing the framework. And so you can feel confident in using it and referring to the UDL framework because it has been proven in science to be effective. We encourage you to visit https://udlguidelines.cast.org to view all the entire guidelines and all of the resources that they have available for you. But the UDL framework really breaks our learning experiences down into these areas of engagement, representation, and action and expression. And so we're going to visit action and expression today. We encourage you to go back and look at engagement and representation in our previously recorded webinars. Now, when we look at the UDL guidelines, we have the principle. In this case, it is designing multiple means of action and expression. What this tells us is that if we can, in our learning experiences, design multiple ways for our students to act on their learning and express their learning, we are going to make things more accessible. Within those UDL principles, they give us a guideline. In this instance in front of you, the first guideline is design options for interaction. And then it gives us considerations. So it actually breaks things down and tells us exactly what this looks like in an accessible learning space. So in this example, the principle is designing multiple means of action and expression. The guideline is designing options for interaction. And some considerations include varying and honoring the methods for response, navigation, and movement, and optimizing access to accessible materials and assistive and accessible technologies and tools. So it can look a little daunting because it's a big old grid full of words. But when you start reading this and you start looking at them, I can guarantee you probably see a lot of these things that you already do in your practice. And if there are things that you do not currently do in your practice, a lot of them are easy fixes. And we'll talk about what that looks like today. The goal of UDL is learner agency at its core. That is purposeful and reflective, resourceful and authentic, strategic and action oriented. We want to make sure that every learner in our spaces, regardless of perceived ability, that they have access to the same content and that they can display their knowledge and learning in a way that reflects their ability. And so when we look at the UDL guidelines, whether it's engagement, representation, or action and expression, these guidelines give us concrete ways that we can create those accessible learning spaces. Now, today we're talking about action and expression. And so when we think about action and expression, I want you to think about some of these questions. How do we design in our classrooms means of interaction in our learning? So if I am the teacher in a fifth grade classroom, how do we design for students to interact? What does that look like in your space? How do we design multiple options for learner expression and communication? And how do we prepare all learners to become their best selves? These all align with action and expression when it comes to access, supporting our learners, and executive functioning. And so, again, you can see those little areas where it tells us exactly what this would look like in our spaces. But we're going to explore that a little bit deeper right now. Now, it's important to also note that when we see these UDL guidelines, they're structured in a way that is sort of that gradual release method. We're building the independence in it towards executive functioning. So, under action and expression, we first start with access. Design options for interaction. Our students have to have access to the learning experiences before they can do anything else. So we first want to make sure that we have varied and honored the methods of response, navigation, and movement, and that we've optimized access to accessible materials. If we can provide this access, we can then move up to supporting our learners. What does that look like? In action and expression, that would look like honoring expression and communication of all learners. So do we use multiple media for communication in our classes? Do we use multiple tools to construct, compose, and create? Do we build fluencies and do we address biases related to how people communicate in our classes? And then finally, if we provided access and we supported the learning, hopefully we'll get to that executive functioning area where we are allowing our or showing our learners how to set meaningful goals, how to anticipate and plan for challenges, how to organize their information and resources, and how to monitor their progress. So the UDL guidelines are really structured in a way for educator success. It's pretty easy to follow, and it's a nice way for you to reflect about your own practices. And you can say, I do this, I might need to work on this a little bit more. This one I need to investigate further. So as you're looking at the UDL guidelines, really have that reflective moment to think about, well, what could I do to better support my learners and how can I get there? And the UDL guidelines may help you with that. Now, today we're talking about action and expression, so it's the how of learning, right? But I want you to stop and take just a moment to think about what this principle looks like right now in your own practice. How do your learners in your class express the learning? How do they demonstrate action? Do they only do worksheets? Do you have them do project-based learning? Are they creating videos? When it comes to expressing knowledge, do you take multiple ways of presentation? For example, if you've got a multiple choice quiz, are there other options for learners who may be able to show their competency in a different way? When we start seeing how we can add additional components to the action and expression in our learning spaces, we create a more accessible learning space. So if you're right now thinking, oh gosh, John, all I do is worksheets and I sit up at the front and I use my PowerPoint presentation to present, that's totally great. But let's look at how we can add some additional supports to make sure that we are casting a wide net and making sure that all of our learners are succeeding and have access to our learning. So I'm going to give you some really kind of streamlined examples. And today is really about, I can give you lots of ways to do this, but I would rather give you the tools where you could do this yourself. And so in 2025, we have artificial intelligence, and I'm going to show you through these examples about how we can go and rely on artificial intelligence to help us think through some of these processes and these considerations. So the first one that we have for access, designing options for interaction. We want to vary and honor the methods for response, navigation, and movement, and we want to optimize access to accessible materials and assistive and accessible technologies and tools. So on our screen in front of us, I have some images up here. The first on the top left is an individual that is pointing to a core board. This is a board that is full of pictures that individuals who may be non-speaking or have a communication consideration can use to communicate. My son is non-speaking and he uses a core board to communicate with me in the classroom and in the house. And so if he needs something like a drink or eating or water or whatever it may be, he can point to those pictures and he can indicate his needs. And a lot of instructional personnel in our K through 12 system have some experience with our core boards. But those symbols that they use in a core board, that could be used for lots of individuals. We can put symbols on our signs in our classroom. We can use visual depictions to supplement the written word in our spaces. This, just by adding some symbols and some imagery, that's giving more opportunity for our learners to capture that content. I also have an image of a student who's taking a time test. And whatever you feel about time test, for some learners, that may be what's best for them. But I don't want you to think that everybody needs to take a time test either. There are multiple ways that we can measure what they know. Time tests may be one of them. Creating a project on the same concept may be another. And so while you may be used to that one method of presentation and interaction, we hope that you can broaden your horizons and see that it's pretty easy to find different ways for us to measure and to engage with our learners. We've got a computer on the screen, and then we've got another little image of somebody who is navigating assistive technologies. And so this really ties into that second part of action and expression. Are we optimizing access to accessible materials and assistive and accessible technologies? And a lot of students in our classrooms are using computers, have access to digital content. So I would encourage you all to take a couple minutes and investigate how some of those standard operating things that we have on our computer can help us create more accessible learning. Whether it is increasing the size of the icons on our computer, whether it is using dictation or read aloud services, if you know where these tools live on your devices and in your ecosystem, you can better support your learners and show them how they can also use these supports. Even if you have an individual who may not be experiencing a documented disability, if we show our students, all of our learners, here's where you go to get the magnifier, here's where you go to get voice dictation, here's where you go to do X, Y, and Z. If we give everybody access to these supports, then everybody can access those supports. And those individuals who may really need to rely on those supports will be less stigmatized because it's just normal. It's what everybody does. So I encourage you to take time to really learn about some accessibility features. I know we'll talk a little bit more about it later in today's session, but if you can find ways to support your learners with our standard digital tools, you're helping provide access and you're designing options for interaction, whether you thought you were or not. Now, this is a little video of Copilot. I asked it, I said, I'm an 11th grade math teacher who typically uses worksheets and traditional lectures to teach my students. What are some other ways I can diversify interactions? And so this is just, you saw just a couple seconds gave me some amazing ideas like using math rotation stations or student-led teaching, interactive polls and voting, real-world problem-solving scenarios, concept reflection journals about maybe a specific concept you were discussing in math. If we want to navigate learning spaces differently, what if we had a gallery walk where students can go around the room and solve problems that you have on little whiteboards collaboratively? Or do some escape rooms, flexible seating and workstations, and scavenger hunts? This is all related to math, and Copilot gave me some nice suggestions in a matter of seconds. And how do we encourage interactive thinking? Maybe some gamification, some project-based learning, peer collaboration and debates, and technology integration. So these are just some initial ideas that Copilot was able to find of ways that we can design additional options for interaction in our spaces. So if you're thinking about your current space, I encourage you to go to Copilot and say, don't put any personally identifiable information in artificial intelligence, but you can be broad. And you can say, I am a fifth grade teacher teaching X subject. This is how I normally teach my classes. How can I find different ways to make it more interactive? Or how can I encourage different means of action and expression? You can even use the verbiage that UDL gives you and ask artificial intelligence to give you ideas about how you can enhance your learning, and it will do just that. It's really, really a nice way to get some additional ideas that you may not have been thinking about. So having AI as that ideation partner is really beneficial to find ways to enhance our learning spaces. Now, the next, that was access. And so now we are moving on to our next area, which is designing options for expression and communication. So we talked about this in our last webinar when we were talking about action and expression. But when you communicate with your learners, what does that look like? Is it strictly written communication? Is it strictly oral communication? Is it a mixture of both? How much time and thought do you put into how you communicate with your learners? Do you use multiple tools for constructing, composing, and creating? Do you help your learners build fluencies with graduated support? I'm sure a lot of us do that. And do you address any biases that you may have or our systems may have related to how people express and communicate? Um, as a former K through 12 teacher for individuals who are non-speaking in a self-contained setting, I can tell you that just because an individual may not be able to express the way that you want them to express what they know, there are lots of ways to figure out what do you know. And so whether that's having somebody create a project or demonstrate a concept in real life in person in class or using those visual supports. Maybe we have them instead of writing a paper, maybe they can just do a presentation where they can record themselves and speak on what they know. I always encourage individuals to look at the end goal. What are you actually trying to analyze? And does that item that you are analyzing match with how you're evaluating? And so, for instance, if you're focusing on content and not necessarily composition for a writing assignment, why can't you have individuals do a presentation or a video or project-based learning? If the end goal is showing you what they know, then we should be free to find different ways to evaluate and to engage with that. And fluencies with graduated support for practice and performance. Do we foster time to practice in our classes? And then those biases related to communication. One of the biases I see a lot in our spaces, just in general, is the language barrier. We have a lot of English language learners. We have individuals who may be non-speaking or have communication considerations. And so are we stuck in the you must speak X, Y, and Z and you must speak this way to me? Or do we have some additional supports we can help make learning more accessible? Whether that's translation services or maybe it's immersive reader with Microsoft tools, there are lots of ways that we can assist our learners to communicate that is not the traditional verbal communication method. So think about your own biases. Everybody has biases related to different topics. So don't feel bad if you've analyzed yourself and you're like, oh, I might have a bias there. We can always do better and we can always figure out ways to support our learners. So always think about the end goal, think about what we're doing to support our learners getting to that end goal, and think about how we're evaluating that. And here I went back to AI and I said, how can we design options for expression and communication learning design? And so it tells me you can do written expression, verbal, creative media, digital platforms, physical or artistic expression. For choice and personalization, do we allow flexible assignments or open-ended prompts that allow for creativity? Do we practice inclusive communication tools, so speech to text or visual storytelling? Do we allow time for collaboration with our peers? Do we scaffold the content in our practices? And do we teach our learners along that scaffold line? How does this look in your spaces? It's a lot of content to really think about. I'm sure that if you're looking at this list, you're like, I do this, this, and this. I might not do this. And so wherever you feel that you have an area of improvement identified, I've got some myself that I need to improve. Just take that and charge yourself with thinking about how can I increase the accessibility in this specific domain. Um, People always ask me, like, how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. Actually, don't eat elephants. But if there's a huge task, you can't get it all done at once. A lot of people come to accessibility and they're like, I could never make everything super accessible because it's just too much. It is a lot. And you're never going to get there if you look at the whole picture and say, I've got to do it perfectly from day one. What you can do is you can find one area of improvement and work on that one area. And when that has been improved, look for another one. It's not a race, but it's an effort to make sure that we are doing our best to make everything as accessible as possible for our learning communities. And then when it comes to designing options for strategy development, remember this is that top level, that executive functioning. They've given access, we've supported our learners, but now we need to teach them to do things on their own. And so in this area of action and expression, I want you to think about how do you allow for your learners to set meaningful goals? What does that look like in your classes? How do you help your learners anticipate and plan for challenges or organize information and resources? How do you challenge any exclusionary practices you may have? And a lot of this, when you ask somebody, a teacher, you're like, hey, do you teach, executive functioning? Do you teach organizational strategies in your class? A lot of teachers will be like, yes, we work on that. We've got a portfolio that students have to check in weekly to show that their notes. A lot of people may not realize that that is actually an accessibility process. Like we are making learning more accessible by giving our students the tools to do these things on their own. So when you think about those things that you do in your practice, chances are you're doing a lot of great accessible practices. You just may not have been viewing that practice through the lens of accessibility. So think about that strategy development and what that may look like in your classes. Went back to AI to see what it would say about this specific one. And I like some of these ideas using SMART goals framework. So specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time bound goals. Do you have those goals in your class or maybe individual goals with your learners? Do you also allow time for your learners to reflect on what they're doing and then adjust and try again? And then what about challenges? Do we foster a growth mindset in our practices? Do we teach our learners how to solve problems and we give them scenario based learning where they can really put themselves in the situation that they are learning about? Do we teach them time management skills and foster collaborative learning spaces? Do we teach them how to assess their own learning? Do we provide that mentorship and feedback? Do we promote critical thinking? Do we empower their own student voice? This could look like providing choice boards for specific activities. This could be having learners share their own experiences. This could be your own reflection about any possible exclusionary practices that you may have internalized as well. How do we teach our learners to be their best selves, even if they don't have access to our learning? This is the end goal of education. We want our learners to be self sufficient. We want them to be able to encounter hard times and find a way through it. And I think sometimes, especially in 2025, we have a lot on our plates when it comes to teaching. And so maybe we don't always get to this part. Maybe this is what we want to get to, and then the pacing guide just didn't get us there. I want to challenge you all to really take time to think about how can I help support my learners to make sure that they are their best versions of themselves. What do I need to do as a teacher to help them set those goals, to help them follow up with those goals, and to organize their lives? Those skills that they will learn if you foster that type of engagement will transcend your classroom. And so when you are teaching these things to your learners, you are also creating a more accessible learning space. You are giving your learners the strategies and tools needed to do things on their own and to plan for their own future. And that is definitely providing access. So are you doing that for all your learners? Are you doing it for some of your learners? This is an area that I think that a lot of us probably need to work on when it comes to strategy development in our practices. So it's okay if you're like, oh, I need to work on this. But I want to, again, charge you with, hey, let's go and check and see where we're at, how we're doing with this, and find ways that you could maybe go back and encourage that action and expression with strategy development. Now, those were just three areas of action and expression. And we're about to get into some concrete ways that you can create more accessible learning spaces. But before we do that, I want to give everybody just a second. We do have some content on this community collective. This is a document that we used in our last action and expression that anybody who was attending could come and give their contributions about how they foster action and expression in their practices. So we do encourage you to either scan the QR code or visit bit.ly/3 capital Q, capital W, lowercase p, lowercase u, capital O, lowercase x. That will take you to this community collective where you can give us your own thoughts and what you do. We all learn together by seeing how other people do things. And so we hope that you'll take just a moment to view what was already been placed on that document and to add your own thoughts when it comes to action and expression. Now, we talk about UDL, but UDL is just how we sort of design our learning spaces, but there's so much more that we can do to make learning more accessible. And this is where I'm going to pass it off to my friend, and she's going to talk to us about WCAG, and she's going to talk about specific strategies that we can do when it comes to digital content to make things more accessible.
Thanks, John. That was great. I found so many connections to what we're going to talk about next, and always learn something from you. I'm not as up on the latest UDL guidelines. I more know the 2.0, so this has always been helpful. So we're talking about where UDL and something called WCAG meets, and WCAG stands for the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. And with the ADA rule that we've been talking about a lot, that is about to come soon, they focus on the 2.1 AA standards. But what I like to point out here with UDL and the WCAG standards and ADA guidelines they are very similar in that they both promote flexible learning and accessible learning. So it's both focused on anticipating the needs of the students that are going to be coming into your classroom, already setting up your physical environment and your digital environment for their needs. And so it's a little different from, say, like differentiated instruction, where you're literally going to have a student with specific needs and focus on those needs. That's also very important and necessary. But for this, we're more anticipating and setting up an environment where they do have that flexibility and it's accessible for everyone, which is just amazing to be able to do that. So we've been for the last few months talking about a rule with the American Disabilities Act, ADA. There is a Title II final rule, and it is going to launch in 323 days for most of us. There are some governmental entities that are very small, and that's the size of the district, not the size of the school or the school district. But for the most part, we are going to be or need to be in compliance with this rule within 323 days. One thing I want to point out, because I've been hearing a lot from organizations I've met with, is what makes this different from before, because we've had ADA for a very long time. So why is this rule different? And so I came up with an analogy, which is dress code. So if you think about dress code in schools, and if there's a principal telling educators, hey, you need to enforce dress code and make sure students are dressed appropriately, that was in place. That is difficult to monitor when there's not really a standard for what that means. So that is kind of where we were before with ADA. We knew that accessibility was important. Everyone was trying to follow it, but there weren't clear guidelines or standards. Okay. And fast forward to now with this final rule, it would be similar to a dress code in school where there's a policy for no open toed shoes, no hats, no sleeveless shirts. That is what we have now with the WCAG standards. So the WCAG standards are just like if you had standards for dress code, it's a lot easier to monitor. I have to also say I despise dress codes, but but if you had it, it's a good analogy. So that was not my favorite thing in elementary school to enforce dress code. But yes, if you had it, it is more helpful to have it very clear and consistent guidelines for everyone. So that is what we do have now with this. Not to make anyone panic. It's a work in progress, and the Office of Civil Rights, who will be monitoring this, they're very clear that they're going to be working with those governmental entities to achieve compliance. So it's not like day one, April 24th of 2026, you better be ready. There will be a little bit of support and scaffolding for that. So don't panic, just work, as John said, one step at a time, one thing at a time. Sorry, too far. Here we go. So where these meet, where UDL, John mentioned earlier on expression guideline 4, options for interaction, and that 4.2 checkpoint, which is optimize access to accessible materials and assistive and accessible technologies and tools. And we're going to focus on just one of those today, which is guideline 1.2.5. And earlier, John also mentioned that a lot of accessibility and a lot of UDL are things that you're already doing, things that we do every day. So for example, with accessibility, a couple that come to mind, one is font size. You're probably not going to give your students something with like a 6-point font to a document for them to read. That isn't going to be accessible for anyone. But especially if you have a student with a visual impairment, you're not going to do that. Similar color contrast. If you're hanging visual supports in the classroom, I'm going to guarantee if I come into your classroom, you're not going to have like a white font with like a light pale yellow background, because that is not going to be accessible or easy to read. However, that being said, there are some WCAG standards and some accessibility guidelines that don't come as naturally, even to me who does this every day. And that is what we're talking about today. So I saved the best for last. We've got audio description. This is one that possibly could be a challenge for you, and it just means it requires practice. So I've been doing steadily trying to improve on this for the last few years, and I can finally say that I'm getting better at it. But we're going to jump into that today, and just know that it will be a work in progress. And that audio description is that the guideline is ensures key visual information is available through audio descriptions for videos. And if you have never even heard of audio description, that's okay. We're going to jump into it and you're going to have a better, clear understanding today. So again, this is that. And I just want to point out that this type of audio description only applies to pre-recorded content. So for live presentations, it doesn't apply, but that is still best practice. So we are going to cover that a little bit today, and we'll talk about the difference between that live and pre-recorded in just a minute. So what exactly is audio description? I know you've been like sitting on the edge of your chair trying to find out if you're not familiar. So it is sometimes also called video description or descriptive video. It is a verbal narration of key visual elements in a video, or it could even be a TV show, movie, or a presentation. And it provides access for individuals who are blind or visually impaired. It by basically just filling in the visual gaps. So how it works, so it actually narrates what is seen and not what is said. It translates visuals into words, and it can be embedded in the main video or available as a separate track. And we're going to kind of go into those two methods and what they look like. So, and actually, I'm going to go back one and just say one thing about this. One thing about the audio description, if you are familiar with alt text, it is very similar. So for alt text, we have an image. And for those who are not able to see that image with their eyes, we have alternate text that is kind of hidden behind that image in presentations, documents, other things that describe that image. And that is very similar to this. And you're going to hear me talk about some another ways that they are very similar. But if you are already familiar with alt text and you kind of just keep thinking along those lines, I think it might help you understand it a little better. So imagine this. You are watching your favorite action movie with your bestie, and this is what happens on the screen. It's suddenly black. You can kind of hear music in the background and maybe some like skidding of a car here or there, but you don't see anything other than that, and there's no dialogue happening. So you know that something's happening on the screen, but you actually can't hear it, and now you can't see it either because the screen is black. This is what it's like for someone visually impaired and everything they do. And I gave you an example of, an entertainment, which is frustrating if when you're trying to be entertained or socialize with your peers that you can't access something. But if you consider that in a work environment where you can't access the work that you need because that screen is blank, that is even more of an issue. So we've come so far with this. It's gotten so much better and easier to do this now. If you have like a Netflix or other streaming accounts, you'll see examples where just like you can select different languages, you can also select an audio description version or video description version of any movie. So if you do have friends or family members who are visually impaired, you can watch that along with them, which is great. So, what to include? This is the challenging part of audio description. Very similar to alt text. First, I'm going to say there is not really a right answer. It is very subjective, and that is just kind of the way that it is. And you're going to do your best. So, the thing to really think about, one, is you want to include all key information. So, let's say that we're giving a presentation. In this case, we are presenting to our staff at a school about behavior referrals for fifth grade and why they have increased. So we have to ask ourselves, what is essential to understand the content here? So just take a minute to kind of look at that graph and think about, if I was going to describe that, what would be the essential information that I would need to convey for someone to understand that increase in behavior referrals? And I am now going to give you a chance to kind of choose between two, A or B. And I will say I made the first one a little simpler, but we're going to do a challenging one next. So choice A is a description that says a bar graph in intervals of 5 is displayed with the color light purple, green, purple, and dark blue. So let's take a look at this graph. We have the years 2020, 2021, 22, and 23. And then we have intervals of 0, 100, 200, 300, 400. And we do have colors, and I see there is a purple, green, dark blue, and kind of like a lighter shade of a grayish blue. So technically this is accurate. It matches my graph on the visual on the slide. But let's look at option B. This one is a description that says a bar graph shows a steady increase in behavior referrals for fifth graders with a range from 50 referrals in 2020 to 380 referrals in 2023. So which would you choose would be the most appropriate audio description for the context that we talked about? A or B? You can put it in the chat or just think about it. All right, and it looks like most of you are saying B, which is the one that I would go with. Probably the only way I would choose A if the context was that someone needed to copy that chart. If someone needed to copy it, then it would be important that the colors were there, the intervals, although my intervals are off, but if the intervals were correct. But yes, to describe this for those that need to understand that there was a steady increase in referrals, we would want to go with B for this one. But again, you might have come up with a totally different thing in your head that still might have worked. So another thing we want to always include or think about that I always wouldn't have thought of this until I saw this, is background details. So we do want to kind of try to give a picture of the slide layout or images, charts, or even character movement. And that applies to those like fictional things that we might be watching. So if you're an ELA teacher in high school and students are going to be watching a play, it probably is important that they understand the character movement. So that would be a time that we would want to describe that. In this case, on this slide, there is a pie chart. And if what we're trying to convey is that most people who play the game rock, paper, scissors choose rock. So 62.5% of the time, individuals choose rock, then that is what is showing here. 25% of the time it's paper and 12.5% it is scissors. So it may not seem that important that you need to say that it's a pie chart. You just need to show that the data. But if you're going to be using this in your classroom and those students might be discussing it later and they're referring back to a pie chart, and that student that's visually impaired is like, what are they talking about? It might take a minute to understand that it's about the rock, paper, scissors. So it is sometimes important to give those background details, especially if there's going to be future activity surrounding that slide or that presentation. So just kind of keep that in mind that there's times where background details are important. So we're going to look at this one again. This one is a little more challenging. I'm going to just tell you right off the bat. So A, the description says a pie chart shows that 62.5% of people chose rock as their first move in rock, paper, scissors, more than paper and scissors combined. And then there is B. The description says a pie chart shows that 62.5% of people chose rock, 25% chose paper, and 12.5% chose scissors. So which of these descriptions would you choose? So really here, I think you could kind of go either way. I would probably go with B, and I'll tell you why. So one thing I always want to be cognizant of when we talk about what to exclude, you don't want to add like extra information or even like if you want students to determine this on their own, that rock was the most, we probably don't need to give that information. So that's giving extra information that for those that need the audio description. Better maybe to give just the exact data that they actually need, but really either of these, depending on the context, could probably be okay. So that's just two different versions. I might go with B. And again, this is challenging for me. Sometimes I want to give more information than what is actually in the image or the video, and you want to kind of shy away from that in your audio description. Just only give what is needed and what is actually shown there, not extra information. So what to exclude? We just gave one idea for what to exclude. Another thing is redundant information. If you've already been repeating it, it doesn't need to repeat again in the dialogue. So if you had an image on the slide that said picnic here, and you've already explained that there's a picnic, you may not need to read that audio description. Another is decorative items and minor details. So if it doesn't affect the meaning, leave it out. And this really goes back to that alt text. So on this slide here, we have a rectangle that has what to exclude on it. And then I have a couple like swirls that are really pretty in the corners, but that isn't important to the context. So if I'm going to alt text those, I'm going to mark them as decorative on alt text. And if I'm going to do audio description, I am not going to explain that when I talk about this presentation. I'm going to ignore those visual elements because they're not important to the context and to the meaning of the presentation. The other thing is over description. And this kind of goes along with what I said earlier about adding extra information. You want to be concise, choose clarity and relevance. So for example, on that slide with the bar graph, you may not even need to give the intervals. It may be more important that you just say there was a huge increase from this amount to that amount, and the intervals may not be needed. And certainly the colors of the graph, while that is actually something there, it wasn't really needed in that case to understand the context. I might need you, John. It looks like it like cut off my remote access. All right. So, oh, I missed this one. I must have got these out of order. So on-screen text is also important to include. So we're including again, visible titles, labels, or text overlays not read out loud. So that kind of, again, goes along with that bar graph. You want to include like the title of the graph, any labels. If you're reading a table and providing audio description for a table, then that would be important to make sure that you describe as well. Oh, I think it's back. I think it's back. Okay. So audio description in action. We're going to take a look at something here. So I am going to pull up something on my phone because I have a picture of it. That will make it easier for me to describe it to you. And then we're going to see how good of a job I do at describing something because you're going to answer some questions for me in just a minute. So I have an image of a class schedule hanging on the wall. And it has things such as arrival, morning meetings, centers, cleanup, etc., going down all the way to time to go from the classroom. And it has a black border and a cute little banner at the top, which is really nice. So now I'm going to ask you some questions. So, or one question actually. So, is the placement of that chart in a good place so that all students can view it when needed to see that schedule? Are you able to answer that based on my description? John's shaking his head no. I'm seeing some no's, and that is correct. So you would not. So this is what that visual looks like. Obviously, if I was going to have someone answer that question, if it was an effective, I might also ask if that had any visuals, and I didn't describe any visuals. I just told you the words. So we might have pictured it and been like, oh, that's not a very good, especially if it was like a pre-K class or kindergarten, not a very good visual. But we want to describe that for that context. Again, the only time it would be important to say it had a black border is probably if someone had to recreate that. If you were trying, like, say someone was going to order this and you're like, which one was it? Then you would probably need to describe exactly what it looked like. But other than that, that's not what the purpose was. We were trying to show what a good visual schedule might look like or not, and whether we thought this was a good one or not, we need to describe that accurately. So again, what additional information was needed to answer the question? Well, obviously the placement of the schedule was really important and what should be excluded and the colors, obviously the banner, even though that's cute, it most likely wasn't needed for that. So we're going to look at a couple examples. So far, everything we've talked about has been for a live video description that we would do on the fly. And that is very challenging. Like you probably saw me mess up a couple times where I fully didn't describe everything that was on the slide because it is live and on the spot. And as I think of things, I'm remembering to do it. But oftentimes we have a chance to either plan ahead for the audio description or add it in after the fact. And that's what you're going to see here. So this first example is from Cast. So you might be familiar with that because John talks about them a lot with UDL. And they do a really good job of adding audio description on the back end. We may not always have access to do that, but I just want to make sure you show it because this is what they mean when they say the pre-recorded. So this is why we want to try to describe on the front side of things, but sometimes it's not easy to remember to do that. And also sometimes it isn't there's not a natural way to describe everything needed. So we would have to add those audio descriptions later. And I'm not really sure how Cass did it with this one, but I have another video I'm going to show you that I made and I can tell you how I added those descriptions. So John, I think I might need you because this links outside to YouTube. And then there's captions too. So if you don't mind enabling those. Thank you. I think it might be need the sound enabled. You don't need to rewind it back. You can just keep going from there because there's a lot of good examples. All right, looks like John might have froze on us, but we're going to keep rolling because if you look at the captions here, this is why captions are so good because it's actually showing you the audio description in the captions. You can see that it's talking about some of the things on the slide. So earlier on, it actually described what the two presenters looked like. It talked about her glasses, what she looked like, and that is probably going to be a personal preference of the person that's doing the audio description to figure out whether or not you would want to add that. Because I maybe wouldn't have thought to do that, but I could see where that might be important to really be able to visualize the presenter that you're hearing. They are also describing those titles that are rolling through. And then any text that is on that slide. So that Sam Johnston, Director of Post-Secondary and Workforce Development, all of that is being described. And we can maybe put that link in, add it to the resources so that you're able to go look at that further. But I think we can go back, John, and the next one should just play automatically within Canva. So that one shouldn't be a problem with the sound. Oh, no, it doesn't look like that one's going either. Oh no. Um, so I'll kind of trying to talk you through this. So what I did, so this is in a program called Beyond, and it is a cartoon. We use this a lot where I work. But what happens is there is a voice talking, and that is that lead character. But for example, right here where it says website down for maintenance, someone that has a visual impairment wouldn't see that. So I added another voice that's kind of like the narrator who very quickly will say, like, forgot your password, enter your username, and we will send you instructions to reset your password. And that is that audio description piece. So we can drop both of those in the resources so you will be able to hear them later. But that is kind of what audio description is when you add it on the back end. Beyond is a paid subscription, so not everyone would have access to that. But one thing really cool about it is that it does allow you to add a script, like type in a script and then choose a character, and their voice is very close to what sounds like a human. And then you can add the two. And then the cool thing too is that if you have to go back and change something, you can just edit the script and it automatically creates that. So that's why I really like that one. It's really easy to do the audio description, and they also have the captioning as well. But I think there's other tools that will do the same thing. One really cool thing about accessibility is it's getting easier and easier. It's probably never going to be automated, and that's okay. We're always going to have to do some manual, but everything with accessibility is getting better and better. One quick example. So one thing I talk about with accessibility and alt text is like not every image can have alt text. Alt text should be a quick snippet. If it's a very complicated, like picture a subway map, putting alt text for that is not going to help someone access that information. So it needs to be converted in another way for those who are visually impaired. Recently, I did this with a plant, animal, and bacteria cell that was all on one image. I wanted someone visually impaired to be able to understand what those cells look like and how they look different, as well as all the cell parts. So I put that into, I actually used ChatGPT, not Copilot this time, put it into ChatGPT, and I asked it to generate a document with proper heading styles that was fully accessible. And within like 10 seconds, it did that for me. So it's every day, it's getting easier and easier to do accessibility. I still had to do a check and make sure initially their description, they didn't think about how it looked. They actually added that extra information I didn't want. And then when I had to go back and explain what I wanted, then it did a great job explaining those animal cells. So when we get something daunting or we have a student, we need to make something accessible, it can feel overwhelming, but there are a lot of tools and ways that it's getting easier and easier. So to end this audio description, so audio description isn't about describing everything. It's about describing the right things at the right time to provide access. And I'm going to turn it back over to John now.
Perfect. Yeah, and it's always, even when we present, like I still get in the habit of describing the things that are on the screen for participants. And so it's just a learning curve. It's something that doesn't necessarily come naturally because you're like, well, I'm not used to that. But putting yourself in the framework of how do we make sure that everybody has equitable access and can get the information, it just takes a little switcheroo. It just takes us some time and practice, but we can get there. So fantastic insight. So, I know this is a rapid fire. These have all been rapid fire events. We tried to really give you a lot of information when it comes to UDL and then the WCAG checklist and all those considerations. So, if this was your first time with us, thank you so much for tuning in. We do encourage you to please go back and watch those other webinars because every single one that we have done has gotten different tips about UDL and about the WCAG. And all of those things are really beneficial in not only meeting the legislation and making sure that we're following what we need to, but just making sure that we are casting that wide net, making sure that things are accessible for our learners. So please visit t.ly/_, capital V, lowercase y, 52, or scan the QR code that is on the screen in front of you to check out our other recordings. And we encourage you to visit at www.ncce.org. We are taking a little bit of a break during the summer, but when we ramp back up for our core academic year, NCCE will be providing lots of different resources, webinars, and other opportunities for you to expand your own understanding. So we hope that you check back with us soon, www.ncce.org. Thank you again so much for tuning in, and until next time, we will see you all online. Take care.